there, it's Sam from Elevate Nation, and today I wanted to chat with you about something that's close to my heart: authentic engagement strategies. I know it sounds like a buzzword, but trust me, it can transform the way your organization operates. Authentic engagement is all about building real connections with your community, your stakeholders, and your team. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about truly listening and understanding those that your services are meant for, recognizing that those most impacted by the systems are the most qualified to speak on systemic reform and issues that affect youth and families. Oftentimes, we hear the terms authentic engagement and lived experience, but what does it really mean in the context of including this perspective into our work? The reality and experiences that I faced as a young person housed in a juvenile correctional facility was drastically different from the perceived realities that system providers imagined. One particular incident that I remember so vividly had to do with me submitting a grievance letter to my case manager, and it had to do with my rights and access to mental health services and receiving treatment being denied. In the facility that I was at, if a team lead was involved in the complaint, they would bring in like a different team lead. But the result was that it was usually somebody who was well known to the other person, usually a coworker of some form, that handled the complaints. And obviously this was a clear conflict of interest just based off their proximity and their contact. And so during this time, a particular staff, who we'll call Mrs. Johnson, told me that my complaint was not valid, despite the fact that I was court-ordered counseling services and my crime was one of the most serious ones on the unit. And so it was really interesting because Mrs. Johnson then told me, would tell me that if I didn't sign the complaint and make it all go away, that I would be in her office until this was resolved or until I signed. Because she would essentially say, this is an invalid complaint. You are abusing the complaint process. If you're going to stay in here until you sign this complaint, because if you don't sign it, then it escalates. And so they would force you to sign it, and the way that they would go about it in the facility I was at is they would say, okay, if you don't sign this, you're not leaving this room, and you're going to miss school, you're going to miss your classes, you're going to miss groups, you're going to miss your court-ordered counseling, and then you'll be sanctioned because you'll be out of compliance with your programming. And so for people who aren't very aware of what a sanction means, it's usually a penalization period that does not go towards your stay or programming time. So at the facility I was at, there were different levels, and you could get different benefits and rewards based off of your level system. So like you could crochet and knit and do stuff like that if you were a high enough level. And so if you were sanctioned, you usually got all of your privileges removed, and you were like that for 2 weeks minimum usually. And so for a lot of people, a 2-week sanction can set you back up to 6 months in programming, depending on the terms of your sanctions, the young person's response to oftentimes very punitive measures, and a couple of other factors too. It's important to know that whenever you get a sanction, all of these things are reported on and they're sent to your judge when you have reviews. And so for me, as a young person that was tried as an adult, I was often threatened with reports being set to the judge who presided over my case, who was the Honorable Junior Carrick. The potential consequences of these things could jeopardize my placement in juvenile corrections. Certain cases, judges have been known to revoke placement with the Department of Corrections. And so what happens is they will, when you leave court that day, instead of going to a juvenile correctional facility, you go to an adult correctional facility, and then you start your adult sentence. My experiences within the justice system were not always kosher or the best. Like, prison shouldn't be fun. It shouldn't be like this awesome, wonderful experience that you want to go back to. But at the same time, I deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And that just wasn't something that happened very often. A lot of the times I was actually demeaned and put down. I won't say it was like every single staff, but there were a lot of ways that it was just a dehumanizing experience. Like in the specific cell that I was in, I didn't have access to a toilet or to any kind of like running water. So if I had to use the restroom in the middle of the night, I would have to hope that one of the staff could get to my unit and let me out to use the restroom in time, because if not, you'd have an accident. Our stories can be more than just talking points for your agenda. They can be building blocks for reform. Imagine a world where your policies and practices are shaped by the voices of those you serve, a place where policies and procedures are created with families and young people as active participants in their paths to healing, recovery, and change. That's the power of authentic engagement. It's about creating policies that are not only effective, but also compassionate and inclusive. The justice system is designed to discipline and teach a lesson, not to be a tool for unspeakable cruelty hidden under the guise of good intentions. At Elevate Nation, we've seen firsthand how authentic engagement can enhance organizational culture, improve decision-making, and ultimately drive positive change. From my work nationally and experiences within the system, here are some of the most common issues I have found with organizations that claim to practice authentic engagement strategies. Number one is most usually engage or entertain some form of tokenism. And so tokenism is one of the most common misconceptions about authentic engagement. Tokenism is when you're just ticking a box to tick a box as a means to fill a requirement. So for example, this would be hiring somebody who is system impacted, but not actually valuing any of the things that they would have to say about being impacted by the system. So like, let's say your organization hired a young person who specializes in reentry services, and then when you create a reentry toolkit, you do not put the young person who has gone through reentry and successfully navigated reentry, like the staff person, right, on this project, right? That is not authentic engagement. At that point, you're just checking a box to check a box. In reality, authentic engagement goes far beyond surface level interactions. It's about meaningful, ongoing dialogue with communities and stakeholders. Okay. The second common misconception is that organizations believe that their superficial engagement is authentic engagement, and that's just not the reality. Many departments, many organizations, regardless of their designated state agencies, nonprofits, for-profits, whatever. Many organizations think that they're engaging authentically when in reality, they're only scratching the surface. Hosting a town hall or sending out surveys is a start, but true engagement requires a deeper commitment to listening, understanding, and acting on the feedback received. And so here are a couple of examples to help you kind of think about what is not authentic engagement and what is authentic engagement, right? So we've talked about tokenism. So let's use this as an example. It's a really great one. So again, we've talked about tokenism. It's a superficial involvement of youth and families in decision makings. So an example of this could be a probation officer holding meetings at times and locations inaccessible to most families, right? So let's say you have a young person named Timmy, and Timmy's parents have 3 very small young children, and they cannot afford daycare. And you are going to require both parents to be there, and you are ordering Timmy and his parents to meet you at your office, at the probation and parole office, right? You can't bring children into probation and parole, not typically, and their parents, Timmy's parents, need childcare to watch the 3 other children. In this scenario, telling parents and Timmy when and where to be instead of asking what times, what days, how can I best serve you, where can I meet you? The opposite of that would be moving to an inclusive practice. So we're talking about involving young people and families in the decision-making process. So in this example, it would be probation officers conducting regular meetings with youth and families to discuss probation plans and interventions at a time and location that works for families. Another example of this could be, you could call this short-term or transactional example. So this is focusing on immediate compliance without considering long-term goals or outcomes. So a lot of the times, one of the other things that I found is that a lot of times people will say, oh, well, you're not listening to me, or I tell them what to do, they listen, and that is engagement. And the reality is if you're telling somebody what to do, that's not engagement. That's not authentic engagement, right? That's not working in partnership. That's not collaborating. That's telling and demanding and then expecting those people to follow those demands. Short-term and transactional interactions. And so this is something where you're focusing on compliance without considering long-term goals or outcomes. So an example of this could be a social worker or a case manager only focusing on completing required check-ins and paperwork without discussing long-term plans or support to families. So this is just doing the superficial questions, bare basic paperwork, and just getting in and out, right? The opposite of that is the long-term relationship building, because that is where your authentic engagement is going to come from. Authentic engagement, one of the key pillars of that is relationship building. And so in this example, we're going to have a social worker or case manager develop long-term plans and support networks for youth and families beyond their case period, right? So maybe one of these things could be, if your families are struggling with food securities, it's helping them get access to SNAP. It's helping them find access to food banks, or finding ways to support or subsidize the needs that they may have, right? Other examples of this could be helping families find services, like how to navigate community resources. Those are all really great, awesome ways. Another example is symbolic gestures. So that means taking actions that appear supportive but do not lead to meaningful change or support. And so by that, we mean typically, in this example, it's where probation officers may be giving rewards for compliance without addressing underlying issues or challenges. So that could be something as simple as demanding that your young person attend school, right? And then not really asking why they're missing school. It could be that your young person has to work because they have to provide for their family. It could be that they don't have transportation, so they can't get to school on time, and that's why they're always late. It could be something as simple as, they don't have an alarm clock at home because mom and dad are gone by the time they have to go to school, and so they miss the bus and they have to walk. So basic things like that, just getting to the root of the problem, right? And being able to help give young people and families the resources to deal with those problems. That is what is authentic engagement, right? So we're going to, in authentic engagement mode, we're going to go to action oriented. So we're going to be taking tangible actions based on the needs and feedback of youth and families. So in this example, we'll have a probation officer providing resources and referrals to support services based on the specific needs of youth and families. A lot of times, families may not know the resources that exist out in the community, or a lot of times they may not even know that they have a need for mental health, right? For mental health referrals or substance abuse disorder treatment, stuff like that. And I think it's really important regardless of what field you're in, whether it's probation, whether it's detention, whether it's foster care, whether you're an attorney, judge, whatever. If you work with system impacted people in any capacity, I would really encourage you, especially if you're in a supervisory role or like where you interact with young people and you're in an advocate type role, to ask your young people, like, what does your average day look like? Because I can tell you, you're going to get so much more out of that young person telling you what their everyday life looks like than the basic questions that you'll ask, like the standard questions that you ask for when you set up probation services. So the question then begins, how can you start implementing authentic engagement in your organization? Well, it starts with listening, and I mean active listening to the voices of those you serve, your team, and your community, understanding their needs, their challenges, and their aspirations. In the partnership created between the Idaho Juvenile Justice Youth Committee and the Idaho Juvenile Correctional Facility, NAMPA, young people currently housed in the NAMPA Correctional Facility were able to provide feedback on Idaho's current reentry services, their providers, and the gaps within those services. This direct communication led to the innovative reentry programs where college students write and compile a variety of resources through the following projects. The Youth Speak newsletter, where students share a variety of personal stories, experiences, or even lessons learned as they've navigated adulthood. And articles and topics have ranged from poems to relaxing coloring pages to sharing how they found recovery, reintegrated back into the community, post-system involvement, or even helpful tips on how to establish boundaries or identifying red flags for dating. The second project that was created in this partnership was the Community Resource Handbook. And so this compiles a list of resources and organizations that provide services to community members. Resource pages list the organization, services provided, how to access services, eligibility requirements, and quick access links. This is a 100% free online resources that is updated every semester as we get new students from our college partners at the College of Western Idaho. Additionally, we offer internships. So interns can get priority access to advocacy and paid travel opportunities or other work-related opportunities that may come. We are aggressively expanding, and so we always try and hire interns for any kind of positions that we may be developing. We also work with colleges to determine a way to pay or incentivize students to want to actively participate in our programs. Next, engage authentically. By that, we mean build relationships based on trust, transparency, and respect. Involve your community in decision-making processes and let their voices shape your policies. In our effort to create this innovative process, I personally spent roughly 2 to 4 years learning about other reentry programs in Idaho and the services that they offer, from both the juvenile justice system to the foster system to the adult carceral system. And then I even looked at some resources and some providers nationally. And so it was really interesting because I found a bunch of certified programs. They all just seemed very similar to me in the aspect that it's group settings and worksheets, and just seems to be very little practical skill development or even teaching young people the bare basics of how to navigate the resources in their communities. In our partnership with the young people housed at the facility in Nampo, we spent many months and years developing a system that creates supportive services based on their feedback. When we originally started this partnership, it was for students to write articles for our newsletter. As CWI requested more work for students to do, we expanded our services and resurrected programs or activities that were created by volunteers or very passionate staff. Finally, you take action. Use the insights you've gained to drive meaningful change in your organization. Whether it's revising policies, changing practices, or reallocating resources, let authentic engagement guide your actions. If you're ready to take your organization to the next level, reach out to us at Elevate Nation. Let's have a chat about how our authentic engagement strategies can enhance your organization's policies and practices. Together, we can create a more inclusive, compassionate, and effective future. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear from you. I'll see you around. Bye.